Are you ready to transform your normal e-commerce business into one that experiences exponential growth year after year using online advertising? If so, this show is for you. Me and my guests will show you how you too can grow your e-commerce business to 7 or even 8 figures so you can go on more luxurious vacations, spoil yourself and your family, say yes to more opportunities, and become financially free so you never have to worry about money again. Welcome to the e-commerce performance marketing show. Hey, how's it going, guys? Welcome to the e-com performance marketing show. My name is Josh Marsden. I have another incredible guest for you today. I have Tony Guarnaccia here. Now, Tony has 20 years of experience, so he's going to deliver a ton of value to you today during today's episode. Tony has helped thousands of businesses survive crises, and a lot of us are in crises right now because of what's happened here in 2020, which is why I invited Tony to come on the show to help you. Whether it was post 9/11, during the Great Recession, or amidst massive company acquisitions, Tony has helped businesses navigate the uncertainties and emerge stronger on the other side. Now, as a child, Tony experienced firsthand the devastating crisis of business failure when his parents' small business failed and they lost everything, including their home. Its impact on his life was powerful. Having lost everything, he determined he would one day figure out how to help business owners like his parents by learning how to run a profitable business. Now, this mission has shaped his 20-year career. As an entrepreneur, business owner, and enterprise marketer, Tony worked with literally the best businesses in every industry, including Google, Microsoft, ADP, Ford, BMW, and also Foster Grant, a massive e-com brand as well. And he's helped to grow over 10,000 small businesses in a dozen Fortune 500 companies. This is why I brought him on the show, because I know he's going to be an incredible guest for you. So let's welcome Tony to the show. Hey Tony,
Thanks
how you doing?
Much. Hey, thanks. I'm really excited to be here today.
Good man, good man. Yeah, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. If you could tell the audience maybe a little bit about your backstory. I know I mentioned a little bit about it during that intro, but if you could just go over how you got started in e-commerce and how you got started with your business, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So as you mentioned, I grew up in small business. My parents had a small Italian bakery, and so that was great. They were fantastic bakers. Unfortunately, they didn't know what they know about growing a business. And so at the age of 12, that business failed and we lost everything. You know, our house, the car, the whole bit. And so we had to move, myself, my mother, my father, had to move into my sister's basement, essentially. So that was rough. It really, really sucked. But we rebounded. You know, we're a very resilient family. And so years later, you know, I really wanted to kind of change the past. And so in the late 90s, I went and studied at college entrepreneurship. And so one of the things I had to do was write a business plan. And so I wrote a business plan, this was back in 97, for doing an online bakery. So my first experience in e-commerce was literally back in 1997, building my own online store to sell cakes. And so we came up with the ability to take a cake and mail it across the country. So we had a dry ice and a whole pin structure, and we literally could ship it anywhere in the world. And so back then it was kind of interesting because nobody had heard of SEO yet. Like they didn't know what it was. And so here I was creating search engine optimization on these pages and coming up for ridiculous terms like corporate gifts, birthday cakes. I was on the top of the list. And so my experience with e-commerce goes all the way back then. And there just wasn't a level of competition, of course, that there was today, but there was just so much opportunity. And so when I left college, we turned it into a real business and really started to grow that from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. It actually makes me kind of hungry too, hearing about Italian, bakery goods and being able to buy some of those. I'm sure it also makes the audience pretty hungry too, thinking about that as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome how you got started. So tell us about that business. Like, I get how you got started. What did you grow it to, and what were some of maybe those early challenges that you dealt with, that you overcame to get it to the result that you got it to? And the reason why I ask that is because I know that there's a lot of e-com businesses are watching or listening to this. They're pretty new, to e-commerce, and that are not yet doing 100,000 plus per month. Right. And they'd probably love to hear, some of the challenges that you experienced in your early days.
Yeah, it was difficult, growing a business back then even. but we did have a level of success. And so we were one of the early adopters, and you maybe have seen this before at like BJ's or a grocery store where you can put a photo on the cake. Have you ever seen that? Where you take a photo, you put it on the cake, you put a picture, you know, whatever. We were one of the first companies in the country to have that technology. And so, you know, one takeaway from that would be an early adopter, because what happened, unbelievably, we won Best New Product at the New York Incentive Show. And so that kind of really got us on the map. We had great PR, great publicity, but even from the SEO. And so what kind of came out of that was really big opportunities. So we actually ended up doing a cake for Jennifer Lopez. We did a cake for Jay-Z. And a lot of this came from just being at the top of the search engines and from winning these awards. And so, you know, the takeaway there would be kind of leverage PR, try to, one of my agency I have now, I started right after, you know, probably 8 years ago, is called Big Fish Results. The reason why I call it Big Fish is because we try to serve the market leaders. And so one thing I learned way back then is always start at the top. When you start at the top, it's easier to go down, right? Because, you know, you get Jennifer Lopez, you get Jay-Z, all of a sudden you're on the map. It's so much easier to get PR and everything else. But the other thing I learned, unfortunately, the hard lesson was that business failed as well. So even though we had great, you know, publicity, PR, SEO, you know, just all these accolades, we ended up failing then. And the reason why was I didn't know what I didn't know. So, you know, in college, you learn how to run, kind of work for a company. You don't necessarily learn how to run your own, even though I was studying entrepreneurship. And so what I didn't take into account was really profitability. So I learned way back then the key is really to make sure you're profitable. And then the businesses I consult today, I really focus on two things: profitability and cash flow. Cash flow and the profitability really go hand in hand. If you don't have that down, your business is in trouble. And so what happened to us is we had very narrow margins. And when FedEx started raising the pricing for shipping, because we had dry ice and there was regulations and very heavy, then the price went up and we just didn't have any profitability left. And so that business didn't work. And so here I am. I find myself newly married with a baby on the way with another business that failed, and I had to live with my second sister. I have another sister. Good thing I have plenty. And so we moved in with her in her basement and, you know, kind of started from scratch. And I said to myself, clearly I don't know what I'm doing. Who does know how to do this, how to have success? And that's kind of what started me on the journey we talked about a minute ago to work with the best companies in the world. And so I left there and then kind of took a tour of working with companies like Google, General Motors, you know, Foster Grant, all these great companies.
Gotcha. Were you like working for them or working with them?
Well,
during that phase of your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was starting out, again, nobody had heard of SEO. So I was really having a hard time finding a job because nobody knew what it was. Even though I was one of the experts in the area at that time, I couldn't find anyone that hired me, that would hire me. So I found a small agency that serves automotive, and I went to work for them, and they hired me that day. And I started working the following day because I was desperate for an SEO job. They were desperate for someone who actually knew how to do SEO. So I ended up working for the company, and then from there, the company grew and grew, the agency grew and grew, and ultimately got sold to ADP, the payroll company. And so all of a sudden, I was working in the big leagues, essentially, working with the top brands in the world. You know, I was running all of ADP's payroll, but they also had a big automotive division. So I started, in terms of e-commerce, the service and parts for General Motors, for BMW, all these great brands. I ended up working both on the dealer side and on the e-commerce side.
Gotcha. But that entrepreneur, that's awesome. But, you know, it sounds like you stuck with it, though, because that entrepreneur bug didn't leave you, obviously, because, you know, you started entrepreneurship, you had some success, had some failures, and then you had to adapt, you had to take care of your family, you had to go and work, you know, for what became ADP, essentially. And then from there, you now are running an agency, right?
Yeah, so I left the corporate world after about a decade, and I said, you know, I got to return to, you know, like you said, to my roots. And I said, you know, I want to start and help small businesses and medium-sized businesses grow, whether it's in lead gen or whether it's in e-commerce. I had done both. I was like really strong in both, so I said, let's start there. And so I started my agency, Big Fish, that I mentioned before. And then over the course of time, I realized a lot of businesses aren't marketing ready. And that's when I transitioned 2 years ago to focus on training and consulting. Because the majority of businesses I've worked with, even big ones, they don't really have a strategy. And so
Yep,
they're trying
true.
to run these campaigns when they don't have the foundation in place. And so that was the
Right.
gap I noticed. And that was really kind of what I pivoted, essentially. I hate that word because everyone uses it too much. But I pivoted to kind of go in that area to solve that problem that businesses have universally.
Got it. Got it. Awesome. Well, that's cool. Well, first off, I want to highlight just, your tenacity and your perseverance, because you could have just stayed in corporate. You could have just stayed working for the man, so to speak.
Yeah.
But because, you believed in yourself and you also knew like what you were, supposed to do with your life, you went back into business ownership and entrepreneurship. And that's really awesome inspiration for a lot of people that are watching and listening to this. Are in e-commerce, that are just getting started and maybe are encountering some stress and some challenges, or maybe they're in a similar situation where they've started stores over and over and they haven't had quite that high level of success that they want, but they're sticking to it because they believe in themselves and they want to make it happen. So that's great, that you've got a story like that, Tony, and thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah. So tell us about, I know right now, like, you're coaching and consulting, businesses on their strategy. And I know that you've got something that you wanted to share with the audience that was going to be really impactful. So I'd love if you could dive into that and show us a bit more about, your methodology.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I was reflecting on, when I started this business is, why are businesses failing? Like, why do they struggle? And what I really came across was what I call the marketing revolution. And so if you look back, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, marketing is very simple. You take an ad, you put it in the newspaper, boom, you get business. Then it gets a little bit more complicated. You take an ad, you put it in radio or TV, broadcast media, it gets some success. Then all of a sudden, you have the search engines come out. I remember doing this way back with Lycos. Like I said, with my first business, I hate the pun, but piece of cake, right? I do some keyword research, boom, I'm on the top of Alta Vista, and then eventually Yahoo comes around to organize things, and then you have Google, right?
Yep.
So as things are going, things are getting more complicated, getting more and more complicated. Now all of a sudden you have social media, so people are creating their own media, and now today you're not just competing with your competitors, you're competing for attention. So you're competing against Netflix, you're competing against Amazon, you're competing against Disney. So how do you possibly tackle that? And why is this a problem? Well, it really comes down to three fundamental issues. Issue number one is there's a lot of fragmentation. Before, there was just a couple channels to be in. Now you have hundreds. Problem number two is clutter. So once you find the channel that works, so say you're in e-commerce and, okay, we're getting traction with Facebook. That's great, but how do you actually stand out within the clutter? And then problem number three, if you can get past the first two, the third one will get many of us, which is the technology. Now you have to deal with pixels. You have to deal with UTM codes. You have to deal with all these intricate things that if they don't come together, you have problems. And most people don't have the skill sets in all those areas. Even me, I've been doing this for 20 years, but then TikTok comes around, and then you have something else, Instagram. There's all these different channels, and you can't possibly be on top of all of them.
Right.
Which that makes it all the more important that you have a solid strategy. And so when I work with anyone, I always start with their strategy. And the whole goal is to get a flywheel effect. So where you get momentum.
Yep.
And there was a seminal book back, over a decade ago called Good to Great. It talks about getting a flywheel effect where you get momentum in your favor. The problem is most businesses never get to the flywheel. They never get the momentum. And I asked myself that question as well, like, why is that the case? Like, why can't people get momentum? And what I discovered is really where we are today, like it or not, for the most part, is a result of the decisions we've made in our life. And that comes down to how you spend your time, your money, and your effort. So if you don't have the right combination, you're going to have a problem. So how do you kind of leverage that? And what I learned is really three things. You have to first focus on what you need to do. Then you need to focus on how to do those things. And then finally, you have to actually do it. And that's really the key area of how you have success.
Yeah, I love it. Love it, man. Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to effort and actions. I mean, if you can plan things all day, you can have the right intentions, but if you don't actually take action, it doesn't equate to anything.
Right. You'll have to align though, because I found so many people, a lot of first-time business owners, they go right to the action. I just want to launch a Facebook campaign. I just want to launch an AdWords campaign, and they tend to fail. And then the worst thing
because
is
they have no plan, no strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's why I teach the Arm5 Formula. So this way companies can scale like we've scaled our clients, using the same strategy and the same process. So I totally agree that, you have to take a step back in order to move faster. You have to basically slow down before you can speed up, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
And, a lot of people that are new to e-commerce, they just want to go straight to it. And that's where money's wasted, time's wasted, and frustration comes as well.
Yeah, it's much harder today because, back, 10 years ago, you could the cost per acquisition off of Google was so inexpensive. So if you're spending 5 cents a click, 10 cents a click, you could make mistakes.
Yep.
But with the revolution where things have been changing in marketing, if you're paying $1 or $5 cost per click, all of a sudden you don't have that wiggle room, which makes the planning all the more important.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't take nearly as many chances. There's more risk.
Correct.
Yeah, which is why a plan is so important.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And so what I really focus on is 6 drivers. So what I found is universally, no matter what kind of company you're working with, whatever niche you are, you're in within e-commerce, there's really just 6 factors to focus on. And so factor number 1 is the market you're serving, which is who your buyers are. Factor number 2 is the product and services you're actually offering them. Factor number 3 is your value proposition, which is why they should buy from you as opposed to anyone else, or do nothing. And then factor number 4 is the number of buyers, how you get more buyers, new blood. Number 5 is the lifetime value, how to increase the value of that buyer. And then 6 is the recurrence, how do you get them to buy more frequently, and with that loyalty, how do you get them to refer you more and more. And so those 6 factors are what I focus on in every business.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome. I hear you. What are some of your methods or your processes when it comes to e-commerce stores being able to identify like what audience that they should serve and they should target? This is a good question for like newer e-commerce businesses that are still figuring it out, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing you want to do is focus on the markets. And how do you do that? Well, a few things. Number 1, look at your competitors. You should really be familiar with your competitors. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that are startups in e-commerce, and you ask them, who are your competitors? What are they doing? They don't know. They don't take the time, which is crazy. So, and it's very simple. A lot of times, if the e-commerce brand is run correctly, they'll write blog posts about that includes their target market. So a lot of times with the categories, the blog posts, or the tags, they'll have the niches right there of who they serve. So that's like action number 1. Action number 2 is, and I guess I go back to my roots with search engine optimization, but do some keyword research. Put your competitor in there and see what comes up. Put your own website up and see what comes up. Ask your sales team. Ask people that are in your company. Ask your buyers. But then at least ask Google. Use Google keyword tool. It's free. Or use a better tool like SEMrush or Ahrefs. Any of those tools will give you great information that is very, very inexpensive.
Yep. Nice. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and you're right. A lot of companies don't really know what their competitors are doing. And right now, there's so much visibility there, that there's no reason why any business shouldn't know exactly what competition's doing. And you got the Facebook ads library. You can look up, what Facebook ads a company's running very quickly, very easily. There's full transparency there. Like you said, there's tools that are fairly affordable, like iSpionage or SEMrush, which is a little bit more expensive. But iSpionage, I think, is like maybe $50, $60 a month. And you can look at ads that a competitor is running on Google, on Bing, on Yahoo. You can see what landing pages they're running. This way you can see what messaging they're using, what offers that they're using as well to acquire customers. And you don't want to copy necessarily, but you do want to emulate what's working when you're first starting, or when you're trying to fix poor performance in your business. That's a good direction to go in to do that.
Yeah, and the other thing I would do is, I say that every time I start like a new division, a new company, I always talk to the buyers. Most people don't do that. So the first few orders, talk to them. take the time to talk to them, or at least survey. So I have I have an e-commerce client that sells fly fishing gear, and he sends out a survey every once in a while and asks them, you know, what do you read? Where do you hang out? Do you fish with someone else? Is it by yourself? How many people? You know, all this detail, and that enables you to develop your content strategy, which is really important for building trust and driving traffic to your site. There's so many reasons to do it, but if you don't intimately know them, it's harder to attract them and ultimately harder to sell them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I agree. Totally agree, man. Well, cool. Well, you know, is there some strategies you've seen with your e-com experience that are proven, that have been tested, that work really well, that you could share with the audience today?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many tactics out there. I'm a big fan of retargeting and using retargeting smart. So most people will do retargeting. They'll just show the same product over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
But I really like more omnipresence campaigns where you're tracking someone over time. So you can, just like you would with marketing automation, you know, if you're familiar with how that works, and you can sequence content over a timeline, you can do the same thing with retargeting. And so you can use content that builds trust. You can use content that builds authority, you know, in your retargeting, in the images. And like, for instance, on Facebook, the copy can talk about trust, authority, you know, reviews, you know, what people have said, ratings, all these things, and then that drives them further down the funnel to buy. And so using retargeting in a smart way is very important, and making sure, and the way I do it is I'm very disciplined with how I tag things. So I have a database I have that keeps track of all the, you know, to get technical a little bit, like the UTM codes, the tag structure we're using. I happen to use ActiveCampaign a lot, but all the different structures for the tags, all of that is in a database, so I can really optimize it. Because a lot of people are very messy with the way they track this stuff, which, you know, it's great to get going quickly, but sometimes you want to clean that up because it makes it harder 4 or 5 years or even a year down the line. You're saying, well, what was that campaign we did that worked so well? You don't really have a way to track it.
Yeah, true. Yeah, it's definitely important to keep your business clean, especially before you start growing and scaling, because it does make things very challenging and stressful when everything's a little convoluted because you didn't take the time to really come up with a plan when it came to, like you're talking about, segmentation of your marketing, you know, tagging different people based off actions or, you know, behaviors, things like that, which is going to benefit you in the long run if you have a very clean approach early on. So this way you can utilize that and lean on that later on when you have large audiences of people and you want to really like segment and target accordingly as well. So this way you can get better results, because segmentation always, for the most part, leads to better results, because you can get very specific with your messaging and specific with the offers that you offer based off of as well.
Right, exactly. So you always want to be able to track it, but then you measure. I mean, a great, you know, kind of maxim I've always used over the years is you improve what you measure. So naturally, whatever you're measuring, you're going to be able to improve it. If you're not measuring it, it's not going to improve, because your attention is going to go there. And so that's why it's very important to have these systems in place, because it's going to make you, the tracking is what enables the measurement. And then you want to have dashboards and systems to actually look at it to make sure it's going in the right direction. It depends the stage you're on. You know, that's a little bit more of a larger e-commerce company. Startup, not so much, because you don't have the volume. You're not going to get any statistically relevant results. But but the easier and the sooner you put this in place, the better.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely, man. Well, I want to be really respectful of your time. So, you know, we're going to go into the last part of the episode today, where I'm going to go through the bonus round with you. So this bonus round is like a fun wrap up to you know, the episode, where I'm going to ask you 4 different questions, and you have to answer each question with only one word.
One word, okay.
Okay, so what caused your biggest e-com success to date?
What caused my biggest e-com success to date? I would say, this is a little bit dated, but pop-ups, like interstitials, when I first started. Yeah, that worked really well.
Okay, all right, cool.
I'm a little bit older in the group, Dave, but it worked really well back in the day.
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, they still work really well.
Yeah,
Pop-ups do, you know? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, if someone that's using Shopify wants to instantly get a 7%, 8% opt-in conversion, use Willio or letspin.io, for example. You know, it's a pop-up that works really well.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, there's other pop-up softwares from like SumoMe and Opt-in Monster, etc., that also can capture leads on your site when people land on there. So there's tons of things you can do there with that. So pop-ups are awesome. It's funny, nobody's ever said anything like that on this show, and we're like 60 episodes deep. So that's pretty cool. Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, what advice do you have for other e-com business owners?
I would say, well, we talked a little bit about this before, but measure. Measure would be the one word.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so critical. And I know that it's a little more challenging for newer businesses that don't have a lot of data, but I think it's so important that you have that foundation set up from the start. So this way you can really track and measure appropriately instead of guessing what's working and what isn't.
Yeah, and if you're small, what I always think about, like in terms of my results loop, if you're smaller, start at the top of the funnel. So maybe you measure your click-through rate and which ads work, etc. As you get down and you're more sophisticated, you have more volume, then you're tracking down to the sale.
Yep, absolutely. So how would you describe yourself?
Resilient is a big word, I would say. We
Totally.
talked about that a little bit today.
Got to resonate with. Yep, I totally agree, man. Especially with your story. Well, cool. What do you see in your future?
SaaS. I'm doing a lot more SaaS work.
Ooh, software as a service.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's great.
That.
Well, it's a smart. SaaS companies have a good multiple if you actually get involved with one from the ownership level. So that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I've created software in the past. Like that was one of the things I did with Google, was actually build some software.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm taking a lot of the things I learned, building enterprise software, and I think there's a big need for e-commerce to be able to track a lot of these things we talked about.
Definitely. Well, it's cool. Well, how can people watching or listening to this, how can they learn more from you, follow you, find out more about your upcoming, big idea that's going to be coming into fruition with the SaaS that you're developing? How can they find out more?
Yeah, easiest way to reach me is to go to my website, Meet Tony G. And if someone has a question I wasn't able to answer today, you just email tony@meettonyg.com.
Nice, simple. I love it.
Simple,
cool.
Yeah. I have all sorts of funnels and offers and all that, but I like to keep it simple in groups like this.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, guys. Well, Tony, thank you so much for being on the show, guys. Tony is an incredible guy. He's got a story of perseverance, and he's making lots of impacts on businesses right now, and he will be in the near future and in the far future as well, especially with some upcoming exciting stuff that he's teased today. So definitely follow him. Can you give that URL one more time, Tony?
Sure. It's Meet, MEET, Tony, TONYG, because no one can say my last name, meettonyg.com.
Nice. Okay, meettonyg.com. Guys, go there, follow Tony, learn more from Tony. Tony, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure today.
Thank you for tuning into the e-commerce performance marketing show. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment with a timestamp of your favorite part and share it with a friend. Until our next episode, here's to you and the success of your e-commerce business.